I think we have a particularly privileged position at EF because not only do we obviously see a lot of companies get funded, but we have, because we start pre-company, we have this particularly special lens where when we read our applications, we get to see what some of the world's most ambitious people are excited about probably a year before their companies even come into the market. So it sort of gives us this unusual lens on the future, which I think is particularly exciting. So some of the themes that we're seeing are probably obvious and well known to anyone who follows the industry generally, but I think some are actually a little bit different. So one thing I would highlight, which we're seeing more and more, is there's been a ton of hype around AI and more specifically machine learning over the last few years, and I think actually a lot of that hype is justified. I think there's some genuinely interesting things happening in the space. What we're starting to see more and more though is people who are really interested in applying machine learning to fields that are maybe less obvious as sort of areas for that to have an impact. So I think the first wave of AI was we had a wave of research-based companies that were actually trying to advance AI itself. Kind of DeepMind is the most prominent example, but also companies like Aralon, Magic Pony Technology, and others. I think that wave has pretty much ended. Partly because if you look at companies in that space, they got bought by the tech giants, and it's actually very hard to compete with the sheer amount of resource and particularly compute power that the big giants are able to bring to bear on that. So I think we're seeing less of that now and more of machine learning applied to very specific industry verticals. So I'm particularly excited about where machine learning can be applied to industries that are largely based in the physical world rather than in the digital world. Kind of recent EF examples from, say, EF8, our most recent demo day here in the UK. Companies like GTN using the intersection of machine learning and quantum physics to rapidly accelerate drug discovery. Companies like Metis Labs looking at the physical world of factories and how you can use machine learning to radically improve the efficiency and effectiveness of factories. These are like big, hard, dirty problems. They're not things that you can easily reduce to a virtual machine. You really have to be in the real world. So I would say machine learning for the real world is absolutely a trend that we're really excited about. Sort of like somewhat hinting at that in the last theme, but I think to draw it out, I think the intersection of machine learning and other computer science techniques and biology is just bursting into prominence, and I think we're going to see a huge amount of really top-tier talent drawn to that intersection over the coming years. I think that biology is the next frontier. There's the famous sort of Peter Thiel line about atoms and bits, and we were promised flying cars, we got 140 characters. I think we're really at the stage now where it's not just atoms but cells that really are the frontier in terms of where can we innovate next most radically. And I think we're going to see a lot of effort, a lot of capital, and as I say, most importantly, a lot of ambition targeted at that space. Maybe a subset of that, but one that I'm particularly interested in, is clean meat. I think if you try and do the thought experiment of, what would a visitor from 100 years from now look at in our world and be horrified at, in the same way that we, if we wound the clock back 100 years or 200 years, there are things that our ancestors did and thought were normal that we would regard as, a moral horror. What's the likely equivalent if we flip that and think about a future visitor? To me, the number one candidate has to be the fact that we created meat in the way that we do today. Kind of whatever your views on animal welfare, it's pretty shocking the level of environmental damage and suffering that goes into making the meat we do today. And yet, we're really not that far away from mainstream, affordable, tasty artificial meat. And I think if you take that trend and extrapolate through all the natural resources that we use, I think you're going to see some extraordinarily exciting things in that space. And I kind of see in some of the applications that we're getting to EF the seeds of some really globally important companies in that space. I think another frontier, it's a sort of cheesy introduction, is space. We are certainly seeing already, there are some of our most impressive companies are space companies like Open Cosmos from EF5 and Transcelestial from EFSG1. These are companies that are really exploring the potential of space to make our lives on Earth a lot better. There are so many problems to be solved in space. So much of the basic infrastructure still needs to be built, and I think we're going to see people build hugely valuable and important companies by pursuing that. A similar theme, sort of infrastructure not yet built. I think if you look at the whole blockchain area, I think it's completely banal to say blockchain is going to be big, but I think what's really exciting is if you think about what is blockchain really good at and what does that imply are the gaps, there's a huge amount of financial infrastructure to be built for the blockchain world. So if you look about the kind of whole kind of range of companies that serve kind of mainstream fiat financial services today, and then you kind of map to their blockchain equivalents, usually what you're mapping to is empty space. And what that suggests to me is that there are going to be very important companies built in those areas in the coming years. I don't think blockchain is a technology that we can put back in the box. I'm not really very interested in what the price of Bitcoin or Ethereum is today or tomorrow or yesterday. The question is, are there important applications for this? And I think increasingly the answer is yes. And that's going to require new infrastructure, and I think entrepreneurs will come in to fill that gap for sure. And then finally, I think there's a sort of different category that's less about technology and more about sort of society, which is that we're seeing more and more people applying to EF to build companies that are actually going to have deep social implications. I don't mean that it's social entrepreneurship in the sense it's often used. I don't mean that these are people whose goals are even necessarily primarily altruistic. What I do mean is that I think we're seeing that a lot of technological change is driving the need for new kinds of institutions. And I think a really key place to see this is in startups that are interested in the future of work. So work is a very human institution that is being radically changed by technology. And what that means is, again, if you look at what are the institutions that we had that were applicable to traditional careers, where you climb up a corporate ladder, all the safety net that we've built around that, all the benefit systems that we've built around that, all the career progression systems, education systems, lifelong learning systems that we've built around that. Do they map to a world where we have much more of a gig economy, where job tenure is much shorter, where people change many times in the course of their career between not just jobs but industries? And the answer in general is I think we need to build new institutions for that. I'm really excited to see kind of ambitious founders with a vision for new social institutions come and build those kinds of companies at EF2.